And so we're going to kind of look at the end as well, look at the specifically the perceptions that kind of take you all the way to this. These are the most profound perceptions we're going to look at today, which is the perception of non-self. And see what happens. Even though it is profound, the basic idea is not that difficult to understand. And so it's nice to have an idea of these kind of core ideas on the Buddhist path. And if there's anything that is core to Buddhism, it is the idea of non-self. This is kind of what makes the Dhamma unique in the world, makes it kind of different from any other teaching, really, whether secular or religious or spiritual or whatever. And it's kind of, in many ways, quite very unique. So this is the idea of non-self, and it emerges in many ways from the previous perceptions. There's like a hierarchy of perceptions, really, that you see with here. So you start off with the perception of impermanence, and because things are impermanent, then they are dukkha, they are problematic, can't hold on to them, can't grasp onto those things you would like to grasp onto, because they will just slip away, whether you want to or not, and nature will kind of reclaim it, if you like. Nature is just cause and conditions and things happening in the world. And things that are impermanent and dukkha, suffering, they are not suitable to be called a self, because a self kind of by definition, or not by definition, by experience, is something which lasts, something which is there. That's kind of the experience we have. I am is this feeling that something inside of you lasts. The me, which is always the knower behind the scene, or always the doer, which is always there, or whatever it might be. And also dukkha, you don't want to have a self which is dukkha normally. Sometimes you'd rather have a self which is dukkha than no self at all. That's just one of the reasons why people would rather kind of get reborn in a terrible state than having no rebirth, because at least you can somehow survive even though it is dukkha. And this is one of the reasons why it is so hard to see dukkha in life. Dukkha is an insight. Dukkha is not something you can just count the number of problems you have in your life and say, oh yeah, life is dukkha. It doesn't really work like that. It is much more profound than that. But the reason we can't see it is because we treasure this illusion that we carry with us, the illusion of a self. We treasure that, and because we treasure that, it makes us incapable of seeing what is actually going on, which is the dukkha. So the whole thing becomes like a blur. The whole thing becomes a distortion, and nothing is really real. Or that's actually the wrong way of putting it. Things are real, but a lot of what we see is just a veil, an illusion, a mirage, a non-reality. And so non-self emerges out of all of these other perceptions, but it's also a perception in its own right. And sometimes it's called, in the sutta, sometimes it's called the dukkha anatta sanya, so seeing non-self in what is suffering. And then you have anicca dukkha sanya, seeing suffering in what is impermanent or unreliable. And sometimes it's just called non-self perception. And the way the non-self perception is described in the suttas, the development of this, or understanding non-self, is basically just contemplating the 5 khandas, is usually the way it is described. So when you contemplate the 5 aspects of personality, the rupa, vedana, sanya, sankhara, and vijnana, when you contemplate these 5, that is where you are supposed to ideally see non-self. So that is where it tends to hide out. And I think it's quite clear that the reason why the Buddha divides a person up in this way, why he analyzes a personal existence in terms of these 5 groups, these 5 khandas, the reason is precisely because that is where the sense of self tends to hold on to one of those areas. And so by understanding those 5 areas, you can basically fully come to understand the idea or the experience of non-self. So this is a bit about non-self. But I want to, as always, look at what the suttas have to say about this. And one of the great suttas that I will look at is called the Pheṇapiṇḍūpama Sutta. The sutta on the simile of the lump of foam, quite a famous sutta. that looks at the five khandas and brings out similes to explain what they are like, so we can understand how they are empty and hollow and these kind of things. So we're going to have a look at these five khandas. So at the end of this process, you will realize how empty you are, how kind of hollow, there's nothing there. And that's kind of nice. One of the things that I should maybe point out, which is people are sometimes afraid of the idea of non-self. They find this really scary. What does it actually mean? Does that mean that I don't exist? As if somehow things change. The point is there is no self now already. That's the whole point. Nothing changes just because you have the insight. It just means that you see things clearly. So you have been living all this time with no self, so nothing, it's been perfectly fine, so nothing is going to radically change. In fact, it gets much better once you understand what is truly going on. But one way of dealing with this from a kind of psychological perspective, so that you can relax about this idea of non-self, is to actually realize that when you meditate, you have some success, you become a bit peaceful, and all of these things start to fade away. Actually, what you are seeing, you're seeing aspects of non-self when you do that. The thinking mind is an expression usually of the sense of self. It's a sense of self that wants to say, here I am, I want to control, I want to be in charge, I need these thoughts, these are important to me, I own this stuff, or whatever it is. And so if you calm down, actually what you are doing is reducing your sense of self. And what does that feel like? Well, for almost everybody, it feels really nice. You start to see that the self actually is a nuisance, and the less there is of the self, the better it is. And then you start to extrapolate. You think, okay, if a little bit of non-self is good, what about medium amount of non-self? What about 90% non-self? And you kind of go deeper and deeper and deeper. You get to kind of the nimitta stages, maybe, for those of you kind of has seen this light sometimes. Maybe you enter the jhanas, 99% of the self is gone. And you start, and eventually the penny drops. And actually, the self is a problem. The self clings on to stuff. The self just creates work. The self creates a sense of having to defend yourself in the world. All of these kind of things comes from the self. The self is really problematic. It distorts everything. You can't see things according to reality. And so getting rid of this illusion, and if it really is an illusion, why on earth do you want to have it anyway? If it is an illusion, it's going to block you from making good choices, because all misunderstandings of the world makes you make bad choices. And so this is the problem. So it's great to reduce this a little bit, and all of you already have some idea what is going on with non-self. So let's see what the Buddha has to say in this famous discourse on the Pheṇapiṇḍūpama sutta. And it goes as follows. At one time the Buddha was staying near Ayodhya on the bank of the Ganges river. There the Buddha addressed the mendicants. Mendicants, suppose this Ganges river was carrying along a big lump of foam, and a person with clear eyes would see it and contemplate it, examining it carefully, and it would appear to them as completely void, hollow, and insubstantial. For what substance could there be in a lump of foam? In the same way, a mendicant sees and contemplates any kind of form at all, past, future, or present, internal or external, coarse or fine, inferior or superior, far or near, examining it carefully, and it appears to them as completely void, hollow, and insubstantial. For what substance could there be in form? So here the body, basically form here, the main part of form is the body. It's also our appearance, right? So it's the body as felt, and also our appearance, how we, maybe especially our appearance even. The way you kind of think of yourself when you see yourself in a mirror and these kind of things. So it is all compared to a lump of foam. And so when you see this lump of foam coming down, carrying along on the river Ganges, a person with clear eyes sees it and contemplates it and examining it carefully. So all of these little words here are important. Yeah, someone with clear eyes, it will mean probably someone without hindrances. Yeah, this is kind of the one of the metaphors here, or similes, or whatever it is, for hindrance, for being freedom, having free from hindrances. I wonder what the Pali is now. Clear. What is clear eyes? Anyone know what clear eyes is in Pali? Never mind. Say, well, Chakuma. Okay, Chakuma. That means that literally means one who has eyes, but so he translated as clear eyes, which is interesting. So probably means someone who sees clearly. And then you don't just, when you see a lump of foam, you don't just dismiss it, but you contemplate it and examining it carefully. And this, of course, is exactly what we do all the way through. We start by contemplating the suttas, and then, of course, you contemplate and examine your experience. It's exactly the same thing. It's this ongoing process of trying to understand things in a deeper way, always contemplating, coming to the end of the meditation. What happened to the foam during the meditation? Did the foam change? And it probably does, right? The body disappears and all these kind of things. And then if you do examine a lump of foam, it is void, hollow, and insubstantial. Yeah, it is always, a lump of foam is like something which is always changing, always moving, bubbles bursting, bubbles forming. Yeah, and a kind of eternal movement. But eventually, as it sails down the River Ganges, what is the local river in Sydney? Is there a local river? Usually Murray. Parramatta. Okay, one of those rivers. Okay, whatever. Yeah. So it floats down. I don't know if you have any foam on these rivers here in Sydney, but so the foam comes down, and eventually it disappears completely as it keeps on going down. It's completely gone. It doesn't exist anymore. And the body is exactly the same. Yeah, the body is the same kind of idea. It kind of changes shape as we are alive. Yeah, always moving. Whenever you look at yourself in the mirror, you never look exactly the same. Yeah, two days in a row, always moving in a certain direction. And so when you see yourself in the mirror, you should never be surprised that you are changing. That things are kind of becoming a bit older or just change of whatever sort, because that is what you should expect. Yeah, and yet somehow we don't expect that. Somehow we kind of hold on to certain ideas about who we are, or what we look like, or whatever. And then you see yourself in the mirror and think, oh, I don't look like myself today. Well, because there is no self, how can you look at like yourself? That's obviously not impossible. Yeah, the Buddha said that in the Pheṇapiṇḍūpama sutta. It was a difficult name. So, of course you're going to change. And so you kind of get used to the idea that there is change. And not only is there change, but there's a change in a certain direction. The lump of foam is gradually decreasing, eventually vanishing completely. It's like old age, you're kind of gradually decreasing in vitality and whatever, until one day, bang, all that is left is a small pile of ashes as you come out of the crematorium on the other side, and they dump you in the ground and you're gone forever. Yeah, so this is kind of the idea of the body. But the weird thing about the body is that in many ways, even though it changes like this, it is also more substantial than the mind. The mind is much less solid or much less lasting than the body. Okay, the body may change all the time, but at least there's something there which changes. With the mind, it's like blip, 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 and it changes, and it moves from dukkha to sukha to adukkama sukha, and it goes from perceiving a friend as an enemy and an enemy as a friend, and it goes from mind is always changing, always kind of moving around. And the Buddha says, and this is one of those nice suttas in the Nidana Samyutta, the connected discourses on origination or source, or causality, where he says that if you should take anything as a self, you should take the body as a self, because the body at least lasts for a while. Yeah, this blooming mind doesn't last for a fraction of a second. So, but we do the opposite. We take the mind as a self rather than the body. And this is kind of how deluded we are, according to the Buddha. And so, anyway, so you start to let go of this when you contemplate the incredible unreliability and uncertainty of even the body. It arises out of the I've said many times already now, it rises out of the dust of the world, the ground, the earth, the minerals. It rises out of that, comes out, shapes into this body, and then it disintegrates, it goes back into the earth again, and it's changing all the time. Are you going to hold on to that? How can you hold on to that? It's just made out of porridge and rice, And some of Deepika's nice, Radha, I read to mention Radha's beautiful food. You can feel part of it is now made up of the food we had over the last 8 days. Can you feel that in there? The kind of the the various dishes and things. The coffee. I think it's quite a bit of coffee in my body. I have a similar kind of a tendency to anti-Sujato. But he is more addicted than I am. That's kind of one of the differences. You have to be careful of those addictions. Anyway, so what is this body made up of coffee? It's not very interesting. So you contemplate any kind of form, at all. And this is kind of sabba rupa, or sabbang rupang, or whatever it is. This is really important, all form. So you start off contemplating yourself, and then gradually expand it to include all form. All form has the same nature. There is nothing is really exempt from this impermanence, the hollowness, the voidness inside. There's nothing there of any kind of substance to hold on to. So examining it careful, for what substance could there be in form? We are all like lumps of foam traveling down the river Ganges. Okay, suppose it was the time of autumn, when the rain was falling heavily and a bubble on the water forms and pops right away. And a person with clear eyes would see it and contemplate it, examining it carefully. And it would appear to them as completely void, hollow, and insubstantial. For what substance could there be in a water bubble? In the same way, a mendicant sees and contemplates any kind of feeling at all. Past, future, or present, internal or external, coarse or fine, inferior or superior, near or far, examining it carefully. And it appears to them as completely void, hollow, and insubstantial. For what substance could there be in feeling? And this is really, really interesting, because feeling is one of the most important aspects of what it means to be any kind of being. Feelings is what gives value to your life. Feel is the thing which drives you. Feeling is the thing which makes you get up in the morning. Feeling is what kind of makes us come in here at 6 a.m. or 5. I don't know when you have arrived here. You come at 6 usually. And this is what makes us do anything. This is what makes us become a Buddhist or interested in the teaching of the Buddha. Feeling is that whatever we do in life, it is driven by feelings. Why? Well, because we want more feelings that are good, less feelings that are bad. No one wants voluntarily to be depressed or sad or sorrowing or grieving or breaking a leg or whatever. This may happen, and it will happen, in fact, but it's not something we want. Everyone wants better feelings, and better feelings is also what gives life meaning, in a sense. Meaning is related also to positive feelings. When life is all just dukkha, it becomes meaningless. You can't live anymore. It's impossible to kind of almost justify a sense of life at a certain point, and you end up wanting to commit suicide as a consequence. So feelings is the root, the driver on life. And if we can understand feelings, it means that if we understand that these things are really out of control, if they really are hollow and insubstantial, as the Buddha says here, then actually it means that life becomes pointless, because these things are not under our control. They come according to cause and conditions. There is no self in there. I don't actually own these feelings. If I owned them, I could do what I wanted with them. Be like this, experience happiness now. Can you do that, experience happiness whenever you want? No, of course. Can you do that if you are the Buddha? Well, you're getting closer. Even then it's impossible to do it all the time, because you are still subject to samsara, to the pains of the body and to the unpleasantness of life in general. But you're getting much closer. You can sit still for 7 days without moving, just experiencing bliss, that sort of thing. But still, there is a problem. Yeah, so the fact that if feelings really are understood to be out of control, existence makes no sense anymore. Because the foundation for our life, what drives us, what makes life meaningful, is kind of cut off at the root, or cut off at the, it doesn't have, the whole thing collapses like a house of cards. The foundation of the house of cards is taken out, and it all collapses and falls. And so the problem with feeling is that it is incredibly impermanent according to this. It's like a bubble forms on the water and pops right away. The feeling comes and is gone again. Yeah, feeling arises, and you can see that sometimes. You have a pain, and then you experience some pleasure. Yeah, you're eating your food, nice, and then you feel a pain in the body, and then you eat some more, and you see something, and this mixture of pain and pleasure moving around at all times. So again, you see this. Now you need really clear eyes, chakuma, having eyes, and you contemplate and examining it carefully. This takes a lot of careful examination. And then you see that there's nothing there. There's nothing to hold on to. There's no core to it. Neither is the feeling self, nor does it belong to a self. Belonging, these are two sides of the same coin. If it is the self, you can certainly control it. And if it truly belongs to you, it's also under your control. But neither of these can possibly be the case. And so then again, you contemplate all kinds of feeling. And it's again this idea of universalizing this, to understand that there is no feeling anywhere that can possibly be under your control. All feelings, near and far, right? This beautiful past, present, and future as well. So you extend this and infer about the past and the future based on the present, internal or external, all feelings. And you see them as this popping bubble of water, void, hollow, and insubstantial. For what substance could there be in feeling? So this is a very powerful insight, and you see in the suttas that not very often, maybe that's an exaggeration, but occasionally you find people becoming enlightened because of contemplating feelings. And you can see why, because it is such a central part of what life is about. So contemplating feelings is very powerful. Okay, suppose that in the last month of summer, at noon, a shimmering mirage appears, and a person with clear eyes would see it and contemplate it, examining it carefully. And it would appear to them as completely void, hollow, and insubstantial. For what substance could there be in a mirage? In the same way, a mendicant sees and contemplates any kind of perception at all, examining it carefully, and it appears to them as completely void, hollow, and insubstantial. For what substance could there be in perception? And this is a really, really powerful, again, a really, really powerful simile. Perception is how we make sense of the world. Perception is how, right now, you're able to make sense of what is in front of you. People, room, ceiling, columns, windows, carpet, whatever it is. Sound. All of these things are, and the meaning of that sound, all of that is perception making sense of it. Otherwise, it's just like noise. And perception clarifies it and makes it into categories and groups it in a certain way. And then you said that's the primary perception, what you see straight away here. And then there are secondary perceptions on how you interpret the things that you see in a deeper way. So, for example, the people you see, are they friends or enemies, and these kind of things. The deeper perceptions. So you see an enemy, you might get angry, etc., etc. And so all of these things that we see in the world, especially how we relate to these things, it's kind of fascinating that it is a mirage. If it is a mirage, it means that you can change it at will, pretty much, right? Because a mirage is not real. A mirage is like, a mirage is when you travel on the road and it looks like there's water on the road, because on a hot day it's kind of shimmering and there's there's actually no water at all. There's just it's just a mirage, exactly. And so this is what perception is like. And the beautiful thing about that, the downside is that it means you cannot really control it. But the good thing about it is that all of those negative perceptions that we have, they can be changed. Because if they're not substantial, if they don't have any real existence, it means that it is in our power, with the right kind of conditioning, to look at things differently. Your enemies can become your friends. Your anger can become metta and compassion. Your greed can be turned into generosity, because all of these things ultimately depend on perception. What is important? We are greedy because we perceive that we need to control. We need to make sure that our future is somehow safe or whatever. And so we're greedy, we amass things, we hold on to it, we can't let go. But then one day you're actually... my future does not depend on holding on to things. It depends much more on giving. That's what my future depends on. And so your perception of pretty much exactly the same situation, your perception of your belongings suddenly shifts radically from one moment to the next one. These things can change so fast. It can change so incredibly rapidly. You may be angry, and to bang, just by change of perception of that person, seeing them as a victim rather than a perpetrator. And if you change that perception of everyone, seeing everyone as victims rather than perpetrators, you change from getting angry to having compassion. And this is part, of course, of this perception of non-self, that you see people in that way. Everyone is really ultimately a victim in this world because we are subject to cause and conditions outside of us. And for that reason, that is a much more true perception than the perception that people are perpetrators of bad things. So this is aligning your view of the world with the way the Buddha sees it. Things are just empty. There's nothing there. You can change. You can move in a different direction. See things in a new way. Perceptions are like a mirage. Remember that, because it is so easy to take these perceptions so seriously. These people are bad, you really believe this, or this is this is in this way, politics is in this way, or my sports team is better than yours, and that's not such an important one, but you know what I mean. It's all of these things, or but we don't really understand very often. It's all uncertain, and it's kind of humbling to understand how impermanent and unreliable our perceptions are. Never trust your perceptions. Never trust what is going on. Okay, trust it if it's in the suttas, but if it is your perception about something in the world, be uncertain, be humble about it, understand that it is likely to change. Not only is it likely that you will change it, and then you don't judge so harshly anymore. You don't become so sure of yourself. One of the surest signs of ignorance is the certainty by which you proclaim your opinions, right? An enlightened person doesn't really proclaim their opinions very harshly or strongly. This may be true, and they may proclaim it, but they are gentle about it. So this is the idea of perception as a mirage. So, okay, let's go on to the next one. Suppose there was a person in need of heartwood, wandering in search of heartwood. They take a sharp axe and enter a forest. There they'd see a big banana tree, straight and young, grown free of defects. They'd cut it down at the base, cut off the top, and unroll the coiled sheaths. But they wouldn't even find sapwood, much less heartwood. And the person with clear eyes would see it and contemplate it, examining it carefully. And it would appear to them as completely void, hollow, and insubstantial. For what substance could there be in a banana tree? In the same way, a mendicant sees and contemplates any kind of choices or any kind of will, at all. Any kind of will, past, future or present, internal or external, coarse or fine, inferior or superior, near or far, examining it carefully. And they appear to them as completely void, hollow, and insubstantial. For what substance could there be in the will or in choices? So here you have this person, who is wandering in search of heartwood. And that's a bit like us. We are wandering in search of the self. We're trying to find the self, or we're trying to substantialize the self. The will is myself. I am the doer, I am the agent. But sometimes that wavers a little bit, because sometimes that agency is a bit out of control. Yeah, you get a bit restless and agitated, and you do things you'd rather not do. So is that agency really under your control? You start to wonder. Well, certainly you become quite quickly becomes clear that that agency certainly is conditioned and influenced by all kinds of things in the world. That is kind of obvious after a while, because if the agency really was under your control, if choices really were under your control, you would always make good choices. And we don't always make good choices. Sometimes we do make choices we regret afterwards. Yeah, because we lack clarity. We get biased. We become stupid. Yeah, and being a bit stupid is okay. I don't mean that in a kind of derogatory way. I mean just in a kind of endearing way. Yeah, it's an endearing kind of stupidity. Yeah. And so then finally you start to meditate. Finally you get this banana tree. You think this is a real solid Australian hardwood. Yeah, I don't know what you have here in Sydney. Jarrah trees is what we have over in Perth. Good jarrah trees over here as well. Yeah. Yeah, okay, so jarrah trees then, that's a kind of good one, yeah. And these jarrah trees are really solid hardwood, yeah. The sense of self is right there in the middle, solid, yeah. You are in control. But no, this is not a jarrah tree, this is banana tree. Banana tree is just one leaf. It's like an onion, you peel it back, yeah. Leaf after leaf after leaf. And eventually you come to the last leaf, and what is inside? There's nothing there. It is empty inside. In the same way, you meditate and you become more and more peaceful, peeling away the layers of the doer. The mind calms down. Okay, actually, the doer starts to seem like a bit of a pain after a while, because the more peaceful you are, the better things are. And then one day you enter a deep state of samadhi for the first time. The doer is completely gone, and you're the happiest you have ever been. And then you reflect back on that meditation experience. And you realize, first of all, the doer is gone. Well, that means the doer is unreliable, impermanent. Yeah, it is not there anymore. I can't possibly. Secondly, the doer is dukkha. Why? Because now I'm far more happy without the doer. As soon as the doer kind of fires up again after a while, on its one cylinder, then 2 cylinders, and then 100 cylinders after a while, the doer gets really hyperactive. The more activity in that doer, the more dukkha. You can see that when you come out of these samadhi states. And finally, of course, it is non-self, because the doer has left behind. You are still there, and you can't even access that doer at that point. So it can't be you. It must be some phenomenon that affects you, but you cannot really be you. And so you see the doer as empty, hollow, insubstantial. This is kind of the process of meditation, how it works, stage by stage. And of course, if you understand that the doer is dukkha, it means that the first factor of dependent origination, understanding the doer as dukkha, you are coming out of avidya, of ignorance or delusion, you're turning it into understanding and insight, then of course you're not going to create any more sankharas. Why would you create sankharas if all the doing activity is just dukkha? You would rather just let go of all of that. Relax, enter samadhi, enter the jhanas where there is no doing going on. That is where happiness is to be found. You stop trying to create happiness in the future by doing. In fact, you create happiness in the now by not doing. That's what you do. You forget about the future, you focus on the now, and happiness comes from not doing rather than doing. And so this is how the sankharas become fatally undermined in dependent origination, because you realize that all this doing is a waste of time. It's not going to get you anywhere. You still do. You do to function, but you don't do to create a good future for yourself, because the idea of doing to create a good future is an oxymoron, is a contradiction in terms. You're not going to get there. Can't be done. Okay, so that is the idea of a non-self in doing. Then we come to the last one. Suppose a magician or their apprentice was to perform a magic trick at the crossroads, and a person with clear eye would see it, contemplate it, examining it carefully. and it would appear to them as completely void, hollow, and insubstantial. For what substance could there be in a magic trick? In the same way, a mendicant sees and contemplates any kind of consciousness at all, past, future, or present, internal or external, coarse or fine, inferior or superior, near or far, examining it carefully, and it appears to them as completely void, hollow, and insubstantial. For what substance could there be in consciousness? So this is like the final barrier to awakening, is consciousness itself. When you have abandoned the doer, and all that is left is kind of the awareness of the jhana states, or the deep samadhi, that is all that remains. And the Buddha tells you it's like a magic trick. Yeah, it's like magic. What is really going on? Consciousness is there. You are aware of something. What is that awareness? Well, first of all, it doesn't really exist on its own. It only exists when other things are there. And if you take those other things away, if you see that feeling, for example, which is always conjoined with consciousness, if feeling is not interesting anymore, you want to reject feeling. By rejecting feeling as problematic, out of control, you're also rejecting consciousness at the same time, because they go together. Consciousness cannot exist on its own. It's this magical thing which is kind of there. But if you throw out the other stuff, which is not interesting, actually you end up throwing out consciousness as well. It doesn't have an inherent or special existence apart from these other phenomena. And of course, that is part of the idea of vijnana paccaya namarupa paccaya vijnana, this mutual conditionality between all the other phenomena of the world and consciousness itself. So consciousness is like a magic trick. Yeah, there's nothing going on. It looks really real. Yeah, when that magician saws the lady in two. Yeah, this kind of a standard magician trick. Yeah, and you pull the boxes apart. Now, half of that lady is in one box, the other half is in the other one. Except that it isn't. Yeah, she is still kind of perfectly well, because you can't kill everyone. And every time you're going to do a trick, that kind of wouldn't be a good idea, especially if you're a Buddhist. It's bad. Are there any Buddhist magicians? I suppose there must be. So this is the idea of the 5 khandas, the last one being a magician's trick, the consciousness itself. Consciousness is this incredibly hard to grasp what it really means, because it doesn't really exist apart from other things. So what is it as an independent thing? You can't really say. All you can say is that you know, you are aware, you are conscious. That's really all you can say here. So what happens then when you see that everything inside of you is empty? And remember, this happens during the meditation process. As you become more peaceful, as you contemplate the meditation process afterwards, you see all of these things. You see how perception gradually disappears, how it is impermanent, unreliable, how it is dukkha, so many of these perceptions that we have. Letting go of perception is a great thing, yeah? And it's not real. You change your mind. Feelings and seen in the same way. The body, the deeper the meditation, the more deeply you see all of these things in this way. And eventually, coming to the very end, it allows you to become enlightened, stream entry, and ultimately arahantship as a consequence. And this is what the last part is about, I think. Maybe not. Let's see. Seeing this, a noble disciple grows disillusioned or averse or repelled by form, feeling, perception, choices, and consciousness. When you see that there is nothing there, that it is out of control, that you don't know what's going to happen to it next, you lose all your interest, you push it away, you see it's dukkha, it's problematic, and so you are repelled by it. Because you are repelled by it, desire fades away. When desire fades away, you are freed. Freedom is the ending of desire. When they are freed, they know that they are freed. They understand there is no return to any state of existence. So there you are, Pheṇapiṇḍūpama sutta. And this is about the hollowness, the emptiness of the 5 khandas, the 5 aggregates, the 5 aspects of personality here. So again, this you can contemplate some of these things in ordinary life. They're kind of, some of these things will be obvious, but other things will be seen only in meditation. Can I go on a bit longer, Deepika? Yeah. Yeah, of course you can go and check. Yeah. When should I stop by? 9 o'clock? Yeah, stop by 9 o'clock. Yeah, 9 o'clock. Okay, I stop at 9. I'd like to have orders, and I can kind of tailor it to the orders, you know. So you just order me. Please boss me around a little bit. Tell me what to. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I'm ready to go straight away. So so whatever. Yeah. Okay, but anyway, so we'd stop at 9 because then we have it clear, and then we can say a few things afterwards and things as well. So yeah, please. Yeah. Okay, so I can carry on. Yay, more. So okay, so. I want to have a look at one of these other little suttas that are here, which is also about non-self. We're still dealing with non-self. I'm not going to look at the Girimānanda sutta because that will take another 3 or 4 sessions at least. That's a really involved sutta, but I will look at the one comes after that. Anguttara 6 is 104, the Atammaya sutta. Atammaya sutta, non-identification. Not made of that, I think, is the basic meaning of this one here. And this is also about the perception of non-self, and it talks about it in a certain way here. So this is, again, all of these things are quite profound, obviously, but again, not impossible to understand by any means. So again, mendicants, seeing 6 benefits is quite enough to establish the perception of not self in all things without qualification. What 6? So all things is sabbe dhamma. Here? So is it? Is it sabbe sankhara? Sabbe dhammesu. Okay, right. It should be dhamma because usually non-self is dhamma. So, yeah. Sabbesu dhammesu, sabbe dhammesu, yeah, in all things, yeah. Okay, so Anguttara 604, Atammaya Sutta. So, this is the difference between, you have sabbe sankhara anicca, sabbe sankhara dukkha, sabbe dhamma anatta. This relates to that. This is why it should be sabbe dhamma in this case. So what are the 6 benefits? Why we should contemplate non-self? And the first one, I will be without identification in the whole world. You will not identify with anything. You will not have any, I am this, I am that, I am whatever that identification is. And we have so many labels on us, depending on our background, our growing up, all of our genetic code, our conditioning, whatever it might be, our bodies, all of these things create identity for us. And identity is always confining. Identity often sets us up against other people because we have a different identity. That is one of these ideas that rebirth really changes that point dramatically, as I was saying yesterday. Because if there is rebirth, and if you have had these other identities in the past, it takes away so many of these barriers. And it's a beautiful way of removing identity and starting to understand other people, seeing yourself in other people, regardless of who they are, regardless of what they may, how you think about them. You can't really look down upon anyone anymore because you are them. You see yourself in them. Yeah, if you look down upon others, you're looking down upon yourself, for goodness sake. And that's kind of madness. And so you don't do that. And so you become much more accepting and much more inclusive because of that. That's a wonderful way of thinking about things. And so you stop identifying with anything in the whole world because identification is so problematic. And one of the suttas, the Buddha even talks about how identification is problematic in your meditation practice. Because you, after all the defilements start to fade away, the mind is becoming very peaceful. Some of the very most refined defilements is a sense of I, which kind of makes itself felt at that particular point. I am this kind of person. I belong to this country, this family. Yeah, this is who I am. And that sense of self, sometimes, it needs to be justified or supported or defended or whatever. And so it kind of can become problematic even in meditation practice. And so the less sense of self you have, the less you identify with things, the more kind of open you are. The more kind of less confined you are as a person. And one of the beautiful things about meditation practice is that it does precisely this. When you meditate, you close your eyes, you're watching the breath. What are you? Those identities make no sense anymore, at that point. And the deeper you go, the less of that identity you have. And when you reach a state of real samadhi, you are just that, you're just bliss. And that's almost no identity at all. If you're just bliss, and everyone else can reach exactly the same state, because a jhana state or a deep state of bliss is the same for everyone. At that point, it's like we become one. There is no distinction anymore between anyone in the whole world. Regardless of who you are, if you go to that point. And so in the suttas, they have this interesting the way of dividing various classes of beings, and at a certain point you have the same perceptions and also the same body. So in other words, there is no distinction between you and others anymore. You are exactly the same when you go through these go to these very high states of meditation. It's like you become one almost. You become indistinguishable from others, and that's kind of nice. And then we kind of distinguish again, and we become humans, and then we start to fight each other. It's kind of crazy, isn't it? That's kind of how we do things, even though in the end, actually, we are not really different. And in a higher level, we're not different at all. Difference is like this thing which just lasts for a while until it kind of disappears again. And so it's great to give up some of our identity, great to let go of that. And this idea they sometimes find in the world that your identity is really important, you need to hold on to it and all these kind of things. Sometimes there is some truth to that, because we have no choice. Sometimes we have to have an identity, so have a good one. But generally speaking, it's best to let it go. Buddhism really goes against the world. It's really utterly different from everything else. Okay, next benefit is my I-makings will stop. You don't think about yourself anymore. I-makings is basically a sense of self-importance, or putting yourself first, or thinking about yourself. This is what leads to greed. It leads to all kind of stupidity in the world when there is I-making. And so I-making is always really problematic. And when there's no more I-making, then there is no other-making. And there is just things happening in the world, and you lose all the silliness that comes from this. I-making, as I said just a minute ago, also it creates all this content in the mind. It leads to proliferation. It leads to papancha. This is a very big problem with the I-making. The I is the source of the craving. The I is the source of views. The I is the conceit. Itself is a kind of conceit. And because of all of that, it creates thought and busyness, because it needs to do all of these things. Craving and desire obviously creates endless busyness in the world. Coming, sourced in the sense of I, the I-making is where it comes from. Mind-making will stop. Same kind of idea. It is only yours, it's only mine, if you have an I. And mind-making, in the end, it creates a lot of, a lot of violence in the world comes from the mind-making, because this is mine. No, it's mine. Keep your hands off. No, I want your country. No, this is my country here. I will bomb your country if you don't give me your country. I will bomb you back. Okay, and then, then we have kind of wars and all kind of things because of these things. So it is really, really problematic, mind-making. I will have unshared knowledge. The unshared knowledge is the knowledge that comes with the Aryas, the knowledge that only the Aryas can have, that no one else in the world has, that comes from the Dhamma, that comes from the awakening experience of the Buddha. That is unshared knowledge. This is why the whole idea of non-self is at the core of what Buddhism is about. This is the real unshared knowledge in the world, asadharana something, asadharana vidya or something like that, or jnana or whatever. Jnane. Sadhana, yeah, right. Sadhana jnane. So, yeah. So, unshared knowledge, yeah. In other words, you have something really special, you have something unique. And then once you have that unique insight, you can start to make really good choices. And you can share it with others. You can spread it out in the world. Other people can gain the same thing. And of course, this is the highest kind of benefit that you can share with humanity. So once you kind of reach to that level, you have the greatest treasure in the world. Now spread that treasure out to everyone else. The unshared knowledge, the knowledge of the Buddha himself is what you have. I will clearly see causes. Yeah, as long as there is a sense of self, you cannot see causes fully because the sense of self stands outside of causes. The sense of self is meant to be independent, causeless thing inside of you that is kind of solid and not dependent on anything else. And this is why it is impossible to fully understand impermanence and conditionality and dependent origination as long as you have a sense of self. It will stand in the way of understanding these things. And so you have to fully recognize the sense of self before you can understand these things. That's why these insights come together as one big flash. When you see the sense of self, that opens up. When you see the sense of self as false, that opens up the possibility for understanding dependent origination. And so this one flash of insight happens all in one go. Then you can also fully understand dukkha, because the sense of self is no longer protecting you from seeing that. Because that sense of self is the one thing you will not be able to see as dukkha. And so you are protecting something inside of you, and that stops you from having real insights. So once that is gone, you can see dukkha, anicca, everything kind of comes together beautifully. You see causality. You understand everything in the world is caused. Nothing stands on its own. It's just turtles all the way down. You know that turtles all the way down? You don't know that? So turtles all the way down is this kind of old fable, the turtles all the way down fable. It's the story of discussing, well, the world, what does the world rest on? Yeah, the planet Earth, what does it rest on? And there is this kind of, I think it's this kind of discussion between a scientist and someone who's really ignorant. And the scientists, they have so the scientists, the Earth is just there or whatever. And ask this other person who is ignorant, well, what do you think holds up the Earth? Oh, it's a turtle. Yeah, the Earth sits on the back of a turtle. And then he says, well, what does that turtle sit on then, right? It doesn't really explain anything because a turtle, so what? Yeah, it sits on a turtle. Well, that's another turtle under the other turtle. And the scientist said, well, what about that one? And then this person said, well, this turtle's all the way down. That's what this person's answer. Of course, it kind of doesn't make any sense because all the way down, there is no bottom, there is nowhere to go, right? So it's a really weird answer. But that is kind of a bit what Buddhism is like. Is turtles all the way down? Yeah, there is no final point where things are solid. But there's a change though in Buddhism. There's a slightly different idea. It's not that turtles, it's not really all the way down, because the turtles kind of go in circle and they come back, yeah, and they kind of complete the circle. So we kind of everything conditions each other. Everything goes in circles. All is just conditions working on other conditions, and that is how the system goes. So it's not turtles all the way down. It's turtles in a circle coming back to the beginning again. That's kind of the Buddhist idea. And this is very hard to fathom, because most people in the world would say there must be something that everything else refers to, something solid, something that is always there, a God, the ground of consciousness, Brahman, whatever it is, something must be there, even if it's just material phenomena. That's kind of the modern view. Something must be solid. And no, says the Buddha, there is nothing solid. It's just cause and conditions working on each other. That is when you understand causality, when you understand is turtles all the way down. I will clearly see the phenomena that arise from causes. So if you see causes fully, you also understand the result of those causes. These things go together. You see causes and caused phenomena. And of course, those caused phenomena is everything. You understand everything is caused, and there's causes everywhere. These two insights go together. Seeing these 6 benefits is quite enough to establish the perception of non-self in all things without qualification. Yeah, no qualifications, no exceptions. You cannot save a small self anywhere. Yeah, I'm going to put this aside as my little self. No, don't keep a little self for yourself, because that will be dukkha if you do that. If you don't want dukkha, then that is the best way. Actually, one thing I should have said, which I didn't mention before, is a really important point that comes up in the Pheṇapiṇḍūpama sutta. And you will notice what it says in that sutta for consciousness, yeah? That all consciousness, yeah? All consciousness, all awareness, all knowing has this problem of being void, hollow, and insubstantial, is impermanent, is dukkha. So all consciousness needs to be abandoned. And this idea of all is just so important right there. This is exactly what you find in the Anattalakkhaṇa Sutta. Someone asked me to do the Anattalakkhaṇa Sutta today, but time is unfortunately gone, and we weren't able to squeeze it in. That is one of the messages in the Anattalakkhaṇa Sutta, that all consciousness is in the same way seen as, let me read it out to you to get the precise. All consciousness, past, present, etc., with the right understanding. This is not mine. I am not this. This is not myself. Why? Because we have seen earlier in the same discourse that it is impermanent and dukkha. And so what that means is that you give up your desire for consciousness. You are averse to consciousness. You are repelled by it, as you are with everything else. And that is like the profoundest expression of Buddhism and the Dhamma, where it is different from everything else in the world and looks at things in a completely different way. And it's really profound. It's so profound that it's very hard to get your mind around. In fact, you cannot get your mind around this because the sense of self will block you from seeing this. The only way to get your mind around these things is to have that insight, the insight into non-self. Only then can you actually fully grasp what is going on. So there you are, perception of non-self. Now, not quite finished yet, because now I'm going to summarize the whole retreat. It's going to be very quick, because the summary should be short. And I always people often come to the end of a retreat like this, and they say, wow, so much information. Where do I start? What do I reflect on? What do I do now? I have to go back home. How can I deal with all of this information when I go back home? It's impossible, can't do it. And so, and that is a very valid point, because we need to simplify things. We need to have it in a way that actually it is usable to us. And many of these things that I talk about are going to be theoretical for the majority of people. Let's just face it. It may be interesting. You may be able to use it sometimes, but it's not all that useful in daily life and in your daily interactions with people. And so I always ask people at the end of the retreat, well, I'm going to summarize this whole retreat in one word. That's kind of handy, right? One word. And so then I ask people, are you able to remember one word? You are you? Okay, good. Well done. Anyone else able to remember one word? The point is, we all think that we're able to remember one word, right? But the reality is that even one word tends to leave our mind, in the busyness of ordinary life and all the things that we do. Even that single word is not always going to be there. So what we have to do then is to remind ourselves of this one word that I'm going to reveal in a second. It is not going to be any surprise at all to any of you, but I'm going to reveal in a second anyway. To be able to remember that one word, we have to come back to the Dhamma again and again. Come back to these teachings, listen to them, read the suttas, get inspired by these things. Don't read them for knowledge, because most of you know plenty enough already about what this is about. Read them for inspiration. Listen to Dhamma talks that explain in accordance with the suttas, that align with the word of the Buddha. Don't have too many Dhamma teachers. Don't listen to everything between here and them, because it gets confusing after a while. Choose a few who you think, okay, these these ones, they have got it roughly right. In the beginning, you can cast your net quite wide to get a feeling for what is available out there. But after a while, focus in on a few teachers. Otherwise, it just gets too confusing and too difficult to understand what is going on there. And I also remember that Bhante Sujato, he had this nice thread on the discourse platform. Yous are listening to too many Dhamma talks. I thought that was a nice one. I thought that was a really good one. And sometimes that's true. Not everyone does this, but sometimes people that kind of listen to Dhamma talks left, right, and center. Nothing goes in. It goes in one ear and out the other, and you don't really grasp it. It's better to listen to a little bit less. And really engage with it and get an emotional reaction from it and let it inspire you so it actually changes how you live. That is the right view. That is the seeing of the noble ones. When you come into the Dhamma in this way, you read the suttas of the Buddha, and that is the foundation for the awakening itself. So what is that one word? And that one word is just kindness. Live with kindness, because that kindness encompasses all the things of virtue, all the mental virtue, the positive and the negative virtue. It encompasses the metta, the karuna, it encompasses generosity, it encompasses so many of the aspects of the path. And if you practice that kindness fully, completely, moment after moment, as much as you possibly can, if you never remember it, never forget it. You never forget it, which you will, of course, because it's impossible to remember this all the time. Then, the more you remember it, the more pure you are, the more powerful will be your meditation when you finally have time to sit down or you go on a retreat or whatever it is, because the foundation will be there. So that is what I recommend you all to do. So now is the time to forget about all of these suttas and just come back to the basics. Be kind, and then you will be right, as they say here. Excellent. So now the time has come to say goodbye. So, okay. So I'll pass the word over to Deepika. Is that right, Deepika? Is that what you're saying? What are you doing? Okay. You can offer something. Okay. Gee, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. It's very kind of you. Okay. Okay. Excellent. Yeah. So, do you want to say anything, Deepika? Or?
So I'll be very brief. So as we draw the curtain, I'd like to once again remember the traditional owners of this land who've been here long before us, the Gadigal people. First, I'd like to, with gratitude, I'd like to thank Ajahn Brahmali for being here, sharing his wisdom with precision and confidence. It has given us a lot of confidence to travel this rugged path. Thank you, Ajahn. I'd like to thank all of you, my fellow retreatants, for being so kind to me, to being so easy to look after, and for your undemanding and friendship. Thank you. I'd like to thank my husband, Radha, my partner in crime, who cut up all the vegetables to feed you, broke almost 600 eggs every morning for the last few breakfasts, allowing me to cook. I am the chef when it comes to vegetarian cooking in my household, so allowing me to do that. I just had to increase the quantities a little bit. That's all. I like to say thank you to Santhi for giving us some grocery items, especially the bags of rice. I did not buy rice this time for this retreat. Boxes of milk. I did not buy milk either for this retreat. And whatever the leftover items I will leave here in the center. They do retreats all the time. Thank you, Michael, for recording, for tech support. I also like to thank you to Ajahn Brahmali again for allowing Sutta Central to dedicate the funds, any funds from this retreat towards the Piruvena project, a project Sutta Central undertook in 2023. It has been a long way coming. We are printing 1,000 sets of books to donate to the Piruvenas. They are the Bhikkhu and Bhikkhuni education centers in Sri Lanka. So there are 824 centers. We are printing 1,000 books, 1,000 sets. That's 28,000 books. So that's a big project for a small entity like Sutta Central to undertake. We are almost over 90% of the fundraising goals. We've done it with little donations from all over the world. All of you, I'm pretty sure all of you have donated, and that is very encouraging. Thank you so much. That's all from me. Thank you once again.
Sadhu, 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 sadhu. Thank you so much, Deepika. Maybe I can just finish off the saying a few words. And first of all, it's been really nice to be with all of you. I don't come to Sydney all that often, once a year usually, but it's really, really nice, very pleasant community, really nice people to hang out with for 8 or 9 days. And also really nice, I like the idea of the diversity in this community. There's people from all kind of walks of life here. The main diversity is the fact that we have bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, lay women and laymen coming together. Yeah, that's kind of the fourfold assembly, as they call that. And that's really, really powerful. And also that we come together, people from different countries, different backgrounds, different nationalities, coming together and living together, as we should do as Buddhists. Instead of separating out into our own little viharas, depending on our national background, we have the same teacher, we have the same Dhamma that we practice, and it's wonderful when we can kind of live up to that idea of harmony and coming together. As this is one of the things I have really appreciated with this group with Bhante Sujato, but also in our Buddha society in Western Australia, we have a similar kind of thing, everyone working together in this way. And that's really, really, really nice and encouraging to me. So thank you so much for your friendship over the last 9 days, and I wish you all the very best. And I would also like to thank Deepika, who has been who is the brain and the agent and who kind of this whirlwind of person who does things and comes up with all kind of ideas and does things. Thank you so much, Deepika, for undertaking these projects. You are the one who does most of the work, let's face it. So thank you so much for this. And you have, good. And also, of course, to your husband, Radha. I don't really have no idea of the division of labor in your family, so I'm just going to how that works. And of course, to everyone else for coming along and making this a wonderful thing. So take care, everyone. Look after yourself. Hope to see you again in the future. Should we stop? Should we do some sharing of merit in the end? Is that nice? And then just do the Arahang Samma Sambuddha to finish everything off. So let's share the merit first of all. Edang men yati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Edang men yati nang hotu Sukita hontu nyatayo. Edang men yati nang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, let's just finish off by paying our respect to the triple gem. We're doing the Arahang Samma Sambuddha together. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavatang Abhivade Svakato Bhagavata Dhammang Namassami Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sangham Bhagavato